Hi, Adriana. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kenny. Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Good. I'm very good. I'm very happy to be here.
To start off, just to give people a little bit of your background, you're American French, but you lived all over Africa, Morocco, South Africa, Angola, Chad. So,
yeah.
In which context did you live in these countries, and how do you think that influenced you?
So I moved to the continent when I was very young because of my mother's job with the U.S. Foreign Service, and it's very funny that we're from the U.S. Embassy, but she was a U.S. ambassador, and we moved there to Chad, as you said, when I was 3, and I spent my whole life there until my mid-20s when I went, or I guess I went to university and then came back and lived there until my mid-20s. But I was there in that context, and I think for me, I was introduced to art very early, and I was lucky that I had a mother who really understood the importance that art and culture played in diplomacy, and the importance that art and culture played in forming bridges between countries, the United States and whichever country we were stationed in, Africa and the rest of the world. And so when I was beginning my career, that was something that was always in my mind. I knew I wanted to work with Africa or in Africa in some way. And it seemed like a very natural transition and a very natural thing to do for me. So.
Okay, I didn't know it was actually all your...
My whole life, yep. And the first time I lived in the United States was university, which was an interesting time because I thought, I want to have whatever an authentically American experience is. And so I went to the University of Virginia and had a great time and studied art and did some amazing work there, but I was there for really my whole life.
What are your fondest memories of growing all over the continent?
Yeah.
Did you have a special, a favorite country to live in?
Gosh, I've lived in a few, so you mentioned them. I also lived in Mozambique, which I really loved, and that was my first introduction to Lusophone, Portuguese-speaking Africa, and that's where I learned Portuguese, although, as we said before, speaking it is a bit more challenging than understanding it. But I don't know. I lived with a single mom, and it was her and my brother and I moving around the country and moving around the continent. Sorry, I can't say it's a specific country, but it was just the whole experience in general was one that I will never forget, and hopefully I can give to my children.
Yeah. Did you get to really interact with the cultures and really be
immersed?
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said before, my mom loved that. She used to take us to art galleries. I remember when I was a kid, there was this gallery by my house, and my mom really liked this Mozambican artist called Olga Dengo, and we used to go there every Saturday and look at the new shows, and we bought one of her pieces, and so. It was a huge part of my upbringing, and for my mother, her mother was an artist,
wow.
And my mother had grown up in Africa as well.
Okay.
In Angola.
It's in the family.
So it's in the family, and but yeah, I can't say it's one specific country or one specific moment, but really just having that opportunity to grow up there was incredible.
And during your childhood, did you go to the U.S. for holidays or?
Yeah, we did. We used to go back in the summertime, and that always was fun because it was different. And, and I loved that, and I could see my family. But then we would go back home, and that was always, home was always a different place. And so I guess the U.S. was also a home base because that's the one consistency we had. But it was a nice thing.
That's amazing to have the experience to live in so many countries. Is already amazing, especially in that context.
Well, I think it allowed me to have not that you can ever really have a total understanding of the continent, because I think you can always learn more, and there's always more to research and experience, but it did allow me to spend some time in Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Portuguese-speaking Africa, and see really, the different parts of the continent, whether I was living in North or Sub-Saharan Africa or you know, and so that allowed me to have a really holistic experience, which I don't think a lot of people have the chance to have.
Do you feel that within the market as well, when you're working with other people, the fact that you lived there, I mean, it shaped you? Do you think that that brings something else to the table? Different perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think so. I like to think that I have an understanding because I lived there, and you know, and I like to think that it brings something to the table. It certainly allows me to just relate more to my clients when if you know an Angolan client, for example, comes to Sotheby's and wants to buy, you know, I know what Luanda is. I know the artists there and a lot of them personally. So it just helps me have a stronger connection with the people I'm working with, which I think is great.
And now you're in London.
Now I'm in London, yeah.
So how did you end up here?
Yeah, I've been here for 6 years, which seems crazy to me because I've never been anywhere for 6 years. But it's been a wild ride. I came here after university to study at Christie's Education to do their art law and business program. And when I was there, I was interning at Christie's in the client strategy department and worked with what we called top client engagement. So figuring out how to keep the top tier of clients coming back and interacting with Christie's. And then from there, I worked in the valuations department at Christie's for a little bit as a valuation coordinator. And then I saw in the newspaper that Sotheby's had opened their African art department, and I applied, and my now boss, Hannah O'Leary, who's head of the department, hired me, thank God. And I've been working there.
When was this? Oh, this was 6 years.
That was in 2016.
Okay.
So I've only been at Sotheby's for about 4.5 years since 2016. So yeah, it's been 6 years of auction work, but I really wouldn't have it any other way. It's one of the best jobs.
So it's quite interesting because you said that you saw in the newspaper that Sotheby's had opened their department for African art. So that's quite recent that they opened that department.
Yeah, it was opened in 2016.
And what led to the
decision?
To the decision of opening this department? Was it the demand? Was it?
Yeah, it was very much a response to the demand of our clients, and also what was happening in the broader art market, and so Sotheby's took a chance in opening this department and having dedicated sales, and that began in 2016 when Hannah came on board, and then I began. I got the job in 2016, but I started in January 2017.
Okay. So for your master's dissertation, you focused actually on Angola.
I did, yeah.
What led you to make this choice? Can you tell us the theme of your dissertation and the most interesting fact you learned while doing it?
I actually, so I was at Christie's Education in London, and I knew I wanted to write about Africa. My mother was stationed in Angola at the time, and I was going back and forth between London and Luanda often. And so no one in my community knew very much about the Angolan art market, and so I thought, well, I'm going to write about it. One, I have access to the country. I have a home base there, and I can do research. I can do research there, and so the dissertation looked at the structure of the national art market in Angola, and what methods were used for market validation in the absence of what we would consider to be, you know, traditional infrastructure for an art market: galleries, museums, collectors, etc. And how do artists grow, and how do they get recognition, and how do they develop careers? And then I looked at that in comparison with a more established art market, which would have been South Africa at the time. I mean, this was 5 years ago, so we have to remember that the Angolan art market is very different now. Yeah. But your second question was, what was the most interesting thing? I mean, I wouldn't say it was a single fact, but what was interesting to me was just to understand really exactly what was happening. So I did so much research. I interviewed people who are leaders in the field, curators, artists. I went to several different schools just outside Luanda, CEART, for example, secondary art schools, to understand the education system for artists in Angola, people who want to, get that kind of training. And so, yeah, it was just incredibly interesting to spend time there and do the research and understand what was happening, and learn from people.
Yeah. I guess that it was very challenging to get like secondary data because there was little about it, so you had to really go.
Exactly. So there was not very much. There was, I couldn't really. People have written about Angola for sure, but I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know what the schooling system was. I wanted to know how UNAP operated, which is the artists' union supported by the government. I wanted to know. Now it's not running, but what Rita GT's E-Studio Luanda was, which was a collective that was operating in Luanda, and I wanted to learn more about the Luanda Triennale and the Dokolo Foundation and the role that played in Luanda and the Angolan art market, and also speak to artists, people who hadn't been interviewed before, as well as the important artists like Antonio who have careers and have been exhibited internationally and really learned from him as well.
Yeah.
So it was great.
Yeah. And when you were taking your master's at Christie's, did you feel like there was an introduction already to African art? Because I still feel that there's very little, unfortunately.
Yeah, there really wasn't, and I had a professor who told me, write about something that you're interested in, even if no one is talking about it.
Yeah.
And no one in at the school really was talking about African art. We had learned about emerging markets in general, right? As you probably have at Sotheby's, and the trends that you see in emerging markets and how those work. But I wanted to know more about Angola, and I wanted to know more about what is happening on the ground, and it just wasn't offered. People weren't people didn't come in and speak about it. Not that, not as if it's not a fault. I mean, it is a fault in a way, because we should be learning and understanding and having those conversations, but 5 years ago the conversation wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So yeah.
And for your, so you took your master's at Christie's, but for your undergrad, did you do it in art as well?
Yeah. So I went to the University of Virginia and I studied. First, I wanted to be an artist. That was my big thing. I was going to be an artist. I was going to be
a lot of people start that way.
Yeah, I was going to be an artist. I was going to be a printmaker. I studied printmaking. I loved it. I was going to go. My plan was to become a master printer, get my MFA, and do that for the rest of my life. And then I started taking some art history courses, and I started taking some art administration courses. And I remember I took a course called Art and Public Policy, and we spoke about Africa in that course. And for me, that kind of started this interest in the art market. And I also took a class called Art and Economics with an economics professor. And that, to me, really started to shape my interest in art business and art markets, and moved me slowly away from the arts into the business side. But I studied art history and studio art at university.
Okay. And why printmaking?
Why printmaking? Well, I can't paint. I really can't paint. I'm not a painter. I'm not a sculptor. I loved printmaking and I loved paper making.
Okay.
So I used to spend a lot of time making paper, and that was linked to the printmaking department. And I had great teachers there, and I really loved the act of creating an impression. I loved lithography. I loved working on the stone, and it kind of evolved from there. And I did my thesis in printmaking, and then I try to print now, but I don't always have the time. But because of that, I'm always really drawn to prints when I see them, especially artists, who work with print. They're some of my favorites.
Okay. And I think it's really interesting how you said that first you wanted to be an artist, and then you found out there was more, I guess. And I think that's something that now is more known to the public, but that sometimes if you want to work in the arts, like there's more beyond being an artist. Like there's so many jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting that now universities are starting to have new courses from logistics to art business, etc. So
no, it's there's so many things that you can do in the art world. I was actually having this conversation yesterday with a young woman who graduated from UVA and wanted to speak to me about what job you could get in the art world, and we went over the many things you could do and the many ways you could get involved, whether you wanted to work in museums, curation, the art market, auction houses, galleries.
It's a world.
Artist studios. I mean, there's so much you can do, especially now with the new digital wave that's happening. I mean, with art tech startups and digital experiences, those apps that bring a Mongovo to your house before you buy it, so you can see how it looks on the wall. So there's a lot that's happening and a lot you can do.
So you're a specialist of modern and contemporary African art at Sotheby's. Can you share with us what your role in day-to-day consists of?
I would say that every day is pretty different. We are a very small department. We're a department of 3. And so it changes daily, but at the core of my job is really sourcing, valuing, and selling contemporary and modern African works of art. And then on the other hand, it's also to work with African clients to buy African art, yes, but also to buy other types of art, to act as a gateway for collectors from Africa to engage with the rest of Sotheby's.
Okay.
And to understand really what my clients want, where they're coming from, what their tastes are, and really be on top of that. But we also do think, we have to keep on top of our valuations. There's a lot of nitty-gritty. It's not always so glamorous.
Exciting.
But so one day I might be cataloging a painting, measuring it, looking at it under a black light for the condition, going to a client's home and seeing the art. That's the part I really love, is traveling to meet my clients and to see what they have. It changes. What's nice about Sotheby's is that because we all work together, we're very community-based organization. I'll be in the basement working on a modern African piece, whether it's an Nwanwu or a Stern or something, and there'll be contemporary Middle Eastern painting next on the easel next to me, or there'll be a modern British piece as well. So and then you can talk to the specialist and look at the differences between the two. And the art histories, and it's a nice place to work.
That's very interesting. And well, now obviously it's a lot harder to travel around due to the pandemic, but in normal life, do you get to go back and forth to Africa, and do you engage with clients there and go and source pieces, etc., or is it more like London based and things come here instead?
It's a bit of a mix. So some of it is clients coming to us and saying, I have this, I'm based in the United States, or I'm based in England, and I have this piece, and could you please value it for me? And that, those, they come from all over the world, but they approach us. And the other part of it is us actively going out to Africa, to, I often go to Paris and Brussels, to the United States, to meet specific clients, to have events for clients, to go to institutions and museums and to understand those collections and what museums are looking for, because that's a huge part of what we look for when we're looking to include an artist in a sale is, do they have institutional following? Are they sought after by institutions? We do absolutely travel, and I'd have to say that's one of the best parts of my job. I was in Nigeria just before the pandemic, and that was my last trip, and that was incredible. That was really incredible. So
I can imagine. I haven't been to Nigeria, but it's on the top of my list.
Yeah, I had never been either, but my mother had lived there as a child, and my aunt was born in Lagos, so I had always wanted to go, and that was my first time going, and I loved it. I can't wait to go back.
And how has it been for you to see the evolution of African contemporary art, like throughout your career, and especially, I mean, if you were already introduced as a child and you were so engaged, how has it been to see that growth?
Yeah, it's been a privilege, I think, first of all, to be able to be in the position I'm in and to have such an active role. That's never lost on me at all. I think watching the market go from strength to strength is a huge sign of the confidence that people have in it, and that's not going anywhere. You know, I remember after the first sale, you said, I think we spoke briefly before about, was there ever a moment that I realized that it was kind of, you know, taking off? And I wouldn't say it was a specific moment, but after our first sale, you know, the audience stood up and clapped for what we had done, and that almost brought tears to my eyes because I realized the monumentality of what we had achieved and starting a secondary market. Well, not starting because Bonhams have been there, but continuing a secondary market. And such a big and validating, but also such a big auction house like Sotheby's, you know, entering this market was a huge sign. So yes, it's been an immense privilege to watch it, but it's just continuing to grow every day, and certainly it's changed so much since when we started in 2017 to what we're doing now, on an international but also a national level in Africa. I mean, it's really progressed quite rapidly. So.
Yeah, so the next question was actually if there was a specific auction or moment that made you feel that it was getting the deserved attention, and I think that's a beautiful moment that you
it was a great moment. But I think, you know, whenever we achieve something, all of our auctions are great achievements, but when we make a fantastic price for a work, you know, we sold Ben and Monroe's Christine in 2019, and that made, you know, approximately £1 million, and that was an incredible moment for us, to have such an important artist achieve an incredible price. And so those are recognition, and those are great moments. But every sale is special, and every day is different, and of course those prices are great. But that first sale was really something incredible for us, I think.
Yeah. And what is it about African art that really intrigues you? Like, is there a specific piece that has like made an impact on you, or?
What intrigues me about the market, I think, is the potential. So, you know, now more than ever, people are really interested in contemporary and modern African art as well. I think people tend to focus on the contemporary, but one of my big interests is the modern African art, and maybe artists who were really strong and really spoken about in the 60s or 50s or earlier on in the 20th century, but perhaps, you know, haven't received the international recognition that they deserved for whatever reason, and you know, we can talk about what those reasons are. That's an hours and hours long conversation, but basically the modern art is really interesting, and the contemporary as well. And sorry, what was your question again? I forgot.
What is it about the African art market?
Okay, yes, I'm there. Okay, I'm with you. The potential, I think. So it's really what's the growth that's happening. All of the new museums that are opening up on the continent, all of the new collectors, the fairs, but also I think what we were talking about recently at Sotheby's is the fact, you know, when the pandemic hit, we had to switch from live sales to online sales, and Sotheby's made a huge push to include to begin this new online age, really, of auction sales. And we've had since the pandemic, we've had over 500 sales of the online sales. I mean, it's been amazing. But the way that, specifically for Africa, the opportunities that this presents, I think you're no longer restricted by being able to come to London or New York or a selling location to participate for a sale, you know, or you really just need a smartphone or an internet connection, and you you can be a part of this community, and you can buy and interact and be a collector. So yeah, that new digital age and the accessibility that it brings for the continent, I think, is really incredible.
It's literally a click away.
Yeah, it's a click
especially
away.
I feel like for new collectors or the younger audience, first they might be a lot more drawn to this format, and also it's less intimidating, I guess.
It is less intimidating because, I mean, it's a little bit of an intimidating thing getting a phone call from a specialist at Sotheby's saying, hello, I know you want to bid in this sale, I'm here to bid with you, you know?
Exactly.
And I can understand that that's maybe like, oh God, especially if you've never bid at auction before, that can be a bit stressful, right? But and we always have had the ability to bid online, and it's always been our goal to give clients, make them comfortable and offer every possible way for them to bid, make that accessible to them. But now, like you mentioned just now, you have a whole different category of collectors that are bidding with Sotheby's because of our new methods and our online sales. In my sale in March, I want to say 25% of them were under the age of 40. They were young. And a third of them were brand new. So this anonymity, almost this
Exactly.
accessibility, has really brought in a whole section of buyers and clients, particularly from Africa, that haven't interacted with us before. And so I think it's great.
Yeah.
It's so exciting.
That's very exciting. Do you think that, things are kind of getting back to normal. Do you think that this format will still...
Yeah, it's going to stay. It's going to stay.
It works well.
It works. We've had incredible responses. So yeah, it's going to stay.
So, actually, I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about the modern art artists and how they didn't get the recognition, and that it's a long conversation, but
yeah,
can you
it's
give
a long
us
conversation.
Can you give us 3 reasons why?
3 reasons, gosh. Well, I mean, one, so it ties into the conversation of what is needed, what needs to happen on the continent in order to develop the art market. And I think, a lot of those reasons are why some of these important modern painters perhaps haven't had this recognition. Whether I'd say local patronage is a huge thing. You need to have collectors who are participating in the market and who are buying the art.
Exactly.
You need to have people what's really important to me is the research and the archives. You need to have documents, methods of preserving, exhibition texts or newspaper articles that came out, or some kind of written history about what has happened, and that has to be accessible and preserved. And that is happening. And not to say that I don't mean to say that it never happened, but certainly on a larger scale, I think you need to see more of it. So it's there are many reasons, but patronage, and then accessibility to be able to participate in international events. And I think, again, when we're talking about the digital sphere that we're now in, you don't have the constraints of shipping your artwork overseas and can you afford that, and the logistics that are sometimes prohibitive for artists participating in international events that would validate, continue to validate their practice or their market. And so now, you can send photos of your work and you can see it via platforms, so you don't know, and you're not restricted that way. Yeah. So yeah, but really, I'd say the what's really important to us is this idea that there are these really important modern painters in Africa who have always been there, and who have always been practicing, but people haven't paid attention to. And this dialogue of people, it frustrates me because people often say, African art is brand new. And it's not brand new. It's always been there. There's an art history that's been there for hundreds of years, but people just didn't pay attention. And now we are simply a platform to show the world what is happening and what has been happening for a long time.
And that's a super important role.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially in the secondary market, you have to have categories need to have a strong secondary market to really flourish, and that's what we're here to do.
Yeah. So unlike Asia, where you have like Hong Kong as a hub,
yeah,
for the trade, Africa lacks a preeminent art market capital. In your opinion, which cities in Africa have the potential to become the art market capital of the continent?
Yeah, I don't think that I would be careful to apply this, like the Asian model, to Africa. I don't think that that's possible or something we should be doing. If you're talking about the market right now, obviously South Africa and Nigeria, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Lagos are the leaders. Also Marrakesh, but there are so many cities that excite me, and there are so many things that are happening in so many cities. So I think it will evolve to be a situation where, I mean, you're talking about a continent, so you'll have several big hubs that will be key to the market. For me, cities like Dakar with, their new, with Dakar, with the museum that's there, cities like Marrakesh where you have 154, Makal, and you have strong Moroccan collectors, Addis, with Addis, galleries like Addis Fine Art, and also cities where the art market might not be super strong, but you have incredible artistic production. So many cities excite me, Kinshasa, Zimbabwe, but I think it's going to be a situation where it's not one city that will be the leader. You'll have, it's a continent,
Yeah.
So.
And so, how many sales does Sotheby do a year dedicated to African art?
We do 2 sales a year. So we have one in March, and we have one, well, it tends to be March, spring and the fall. Our last one was in March and October, but in London. But we also have been adding more and more African pieces to other sales. So we might add there might be African pieces in the contemporary day sale or the contemporary evening sale, or sometimes, I'm looking at this book, Great Women Artists, we just did a female artist sale where we included an Irma Stern, because she is, one of the biggest female artists from the continent, one of the most sought after. And that is really in response to the demand that we're seeing. We have our sales as a platform to nurture and pay special attention to these artists, and after a certain point, some of them might graduate in a way to these international sales. But those sales are bigger, and so in some, unless the artist is ready and has the collector base to go into that sale, it can happen that they might get lost. Yeah. So our sale provides a very dedicated platform. We pay a lot of attention. We know what our clients are looking for. We are very careful about what we pick and the pieces that we pick. And so, yeah.
And so far, how have these pieces that are integrated in those other sales done?
Yeah, they do really well. They've performed really well. We, like I said, we've seen an increasing interest across the board. It's interesting because, again, my sales have a very strong following of African collectors. So I'd say about, since starting in 2017, roughly maybe 30% of our bidders were from Africa, but about 70% of our sales go to African collectors. So that African collectors are at the core of what we do, and that's important to us. Including these pieces in other sales allows us to reach a pocket of collectors that we might not have been able to reach otherwise. And so it's just about broadening that base continuously. Yeah. So it's 100% advantageous. And we are what we like to say one Sotheby's. And so whether you're in an African sale or a contemporary sale, you're still going to have access to the same collector base.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to ask you, while the continent's local collector base is growing, what is, in terms of percentages, African collectors versus others on your sales?
Mm-hmm.
And what would be like the top 3 countries of that collectors come from?
So for my sales, like I said, African collectors participate in a very strong way. They are the core of what we do. And it's exciting for us to learn from them, but also to show them pieces that maybe they hadn't considered before.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what we do. But in terms of the strongest cities or countries, I mean, from a market perspective, like I said before, South Africa, Morocco, and Nigeria are you see the most artists from there in our sales. We have a lot of collectors from there, but that's because the market are the strongest, and they show up.
And what mediums and styles do you see doing better in auction?
This is such a hard question, and I
what is more? Do you see something that attracts the audiences regularly? That it's something is gonna get them excited, or?
I think this is a question that we get asked a lot, and I don't love the question just because we have collectors who have such different tastes, and we always say buy what you like and what you love, rather first and foremost, rather than for investment or any other purpose. But yeah, I guess you could say that size can sometimes be restrictive, and that painting might sell better than sculpture. But again, we cater to so many different clienteles and different types of collectors that it really varies. I wouldn't say one color does better or another, or I guess more people gravitate towards paintings for the ease of, everyone has walls. Maybe not everyone has the space to put
sculpture.
If we're talking about private collectors, sculpture in their home. But yeah, I mean, we like I said, we work really hard with our clients to know exactly what they like, and so and it really varies. I mean, we have
there's tastes for everything.
Of course, video art is probably more difficult to sell.
Yeah.
Massive sculpture, but a bottle cap piece by Ellen Atsui, not everyone has the space for that, but we sell them incredibly well, and they're always in demand. So yeah, it's a difficult question because it really, really varies. It really varies.
So when looking for scouting for pieces, what attracts you? I guess it's kind of a leading question from the one before, but it's also something personal, I guess. What triggers you to think? Yeah, well, this is special. Yeah, we try really hard to not let our personal tastes come into play, because that's not what we're there to do. I would never say, I like this one better than that one. Yeah. We're not going to include that. That doesn't happen. What we look for certainly are strong provenance. So, and provenance being, what the history of that piece, who's owned it. We look for basically the importance of that artwork within the practice of the artist. So, whether it's for an artist like Mohamed Malehi, did he produce this painting when he was working in New York City and was influenced by what was happening there in abstract expressionism? Did he produce it when he was back in Morocco? And so the time period when this art was produced, how it relates to their broader practice is important to us. Condition can often be an issue with the work that we're dealing with, and it has to be in good condition. But and like I said, these modern pieces that have historical importance. A really good example of that is there is an artist in Brazzaville or Pointe-Noire his name is Frederick Trigo Pula, and we came across his work in an exhibition called Africa Explores. And when he was exhibiting in the 80s, 70s, he was really important artist, dealing with some really important themes of the Western presence in Africa, what was happening in Congo at the time, the new,
political structure that has been there. It's really, really interesting stuff. And then he stopped exhibiting. People weren't paying as much attention for the reasons that we spoke about earlier. And when we found his piece, we knew that this was incredibly important, and it later ended up being sought after by some incredibly important institutional collections and private collectors who all knew that this guy was an incredibly important artist. So being able to unearth those pieces that you see in these collections or that had been included in these exhibitions is certainly what one of the characteristics I would look for.
And in terms of provenance, because you touched upon that, do you see that the provenance in regards to these pieces, especially African contemporary art or African modern art, is still very short? It's still very,
well, it really depends. Sometimes, it compared to other categories, for sure, it's shorter. Not always, but I would say. But it really depends. Some of them have been in the same collection forever. Some of them have changed hands a couple times. But yeah, you do see kind of across the board that people tend to hold on to these works because they loved them and they think they're important. And I think that, to me, the length of provenance isn't important so much as who has owned it.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice. And do you tend to have new artists on sales? Is it something you go after, or are there names that are repetitively?
Yeah.
I mean, there's always demand for certain pieces and artists, but do clients like to see something new, and do they get excited by it?
This is a great question. Yes, we really try to include. I should say that we have more flexibility than perhaps other sale categories to do this, to introduce an artist into a secondary market or to introduce an artist to a bigger auction house like Sotheby's. Again, we do this when we do take some risks, but we know by and large what our clients are looking for, and so I'll put something in a sale where maybe they hadn't been before, but we know that there's either a waiting list from the gallery, or I know that I've been approached by someone looking for a piece by that artist. A good example of that is a Congolese artist named Eddie Kamonga Ilunga. We put his piece in sale in 2017 in our first auction, and we were hesitant at first, but we knew that there was a waiting list. We knew his work was sought after, and so we did that. But yes, we tried to include new artists. We try to we pride ourselves on having one of the biggest selections of works from the continent because, whilst we are the contemporary African art department, that is 54 countries, a huge amount of artists, and so we try really hard to be able to represent the entirety of the continent. That's very important to us. We've set some incredible markers for these artists. I mean, I think in 4 years we've broken over 90 artist records, which is huge. I mean, it's huge. So yes, we do try to include new names. From your course and from being in the art world that unfortunately it's not our job to start a market for an artist, but it is certainly our job to grow that market. And if we know and we're confident that will have a good response, then for sure we do that.
And do you think that people are starting to see African contemporary art or African art in general as an investment? If not, what do you think is lacking? Because obviously it's amazing and important to have private collectors, but I think it's also important to for people to see it as a worthwhile
investment. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we always say our advice is buy what you love. We try not to think about this idea of investment, but of course, I mean that idea of this category lends itself very nicely to that idea because People are looking for new, exciting works of art, and the continent is able to deliver that.
Do you think people see that the pieces are worth that they have potential to be?
People definitely see the potential in the continent, and they see that there is rapid growth. Again, we would caution against people buying something they don't like because they think it'll go up in value. You know, you buy what you like, and if it happens to increase in value, then that's great for you. But I wouldn't buy, you know, just because you think that that's just, you know, you should buy what you love. Yeah. But yeah, people are aware of that, and people are, you know, following the trends. And I think if you're going to purchase and you're going to engage in the category, you need to educate yourself about what's happening. You really need to understand, because that's really important. So whether it's reaching out, doing what you're doing, you know, and people can listen to your podcast and understand, or they can speak to specialists at auction houses or galleries, but I think it's important to have that understanding before you purchase.
Yeah. Because I think that's what also makes the market grow. And
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, people, if you're going to come in and just buy a piece and then leave, okay, it's great. But at the same time, we want collectors who care about the artists that they're buying, who support emerging artists and who are there for them, especially African collectors, you know, to really understand and see investment in art as a method of advancing the art sector in your country, but also really the economy of your country, and as a method of development.
Yeah. What do you think is missing to support the talents coming from Africa?
Well, I think what needs to happen is growth nationally. I think that this market needs to be led by Africans and by Africa. And that is happening, for sure. And I think that is the right step forward. You see more and more museums opening up in Africa, whether it's, you know, the Palais de Lomé in Togo, the museum in Dakar, like we mentioned, Makal, Sites Mocha, Norval. So this national push, I think, is really strong in having opportunities for artists to exhibit and to see each other's work, and not only other African artists' work, but other from other countries. You know, bringing American artists to Angola to exhibit, and to have this dialogue and this connection, I think, is really important. You don't want it to be insular by any means, but yeah, I think the next step is, or not the next step, but the most important thing that needs to happen now is really this development nationally of these strong national art markets, and how that happens is an amazing discussion, but there's a lot to do.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the future of African art in like 10 years?
Gosh, I mean, I think it's, you know, this isn't a trend market. I think this is a market that, I mean, I know that this is a market that's here to stay. It's going to continue to grow. We have new collectors all the time from all over the world, and it's incredible where someone will email me from saying, I'm looking to understand African contemporary art coming from Africa, and I want to be a part of it. But also, what's exciting again is to learn more about the tastes of my clients in Africa, and what they see happening, and what they see as, and who they see as kind of the next important artists. Because as much as our job is to educate existing Sotheby's clients about contemporary art from Africa, and to bring African clients to Sotheby's to engage in African art and also other businesses. We also have a lot to learn about from people who are there. So yeah, continuous growth, more clients all the time, and the new effect of the digital world that we're in. It's going to completely change it, because you can have online art fairs, you can have online museums, online exhibitions. We have our online sales. So yeah, I think you'll see a lot more from the market, and hopefully a lot more from Sotheby's.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned how like sometimes you get emails from maybe countries that you wouldn't have thought, a person from a country you wouldn't have thought, and I think that's one of the goals, because when places like Sotheby's introduce these markets and they're talked about, other people are introduced to this market that they might not have come across before. So I think that's really important, and it must be super interesting to see these collectors that have nothing to do with Africa being interested in supporting emerging artists and supporting the market.
Yeah, it's great. I really love it. I love it when I have a client who has never bid in my sales before, but is either new to Sotheby's or has been participating in, whether it's an old master sale or a furniture sale, suddenly pops up on my African sale. That to me is really satisfactory and really a positive sign, because
it means you're doing a good job.
Yeah, it means we're doing a good job, but these are clients, these are people who are really keen to learn and to know, and to be present in this market, and I think that's so important. But and what's also cool is to have, I have a client who bids in every other sale but African art, and I love that, because in a way it's different. If they have an interest in African art, that's great, but they don't necessarily have to, to engage with Sotheby's and to work with me as a specialist. That it can be anyone.
Yeah. As you said, it's really important for African people to be at the forefront of this conversation, of this growth
of the market. Yeah,
but I feel like, I'm sure there are people that are
absolutely
educated enough to be in these positions, but I don't really see them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that is one of the biggest issues, is that people often assume that there are no Africans qualified to do, my job, other people's jobs, and that's absolutely not the case. There's I can think of so many people off the top of my head who, and they, and they're present and they're doing things, but it's a problem. We have to find a way to bring them into that part of those jobs. But yeah, that talent is absolutely there. It's just figuring out how to get those positions.
And because I feel that a lot, and as we were saying, like, I feel like obviously I am Angolan, my parents are Angolan, but I was born and raised in Portugal, so I am aware that there's a limit. Obviously, I have family that lives there, and I'm aware of the struggles and the day-to-day life.
Yeah.
But it's very different to live it, and I think that people like you that have actually lived there, I mean, if you live there from being 3 to your early 20s, you have an
understanding.
You've seen it all.
Yeah, I mean,
especially living in a different country. So I think that changes completely your position or your perspective when you talk about the artists or their struggles, and when you know what they need, and what the market needs and has to offer.
I think there's so many different types of experiences and people who have interacted with the continent in so many different ways, that for us to say this type of person should be doing this and this, to set these boundaries and these limits on the people who can be involved in the market and the people who are transforming the market. Why? Why do that? It makes no sense. So, what you're doing is incredibly important. What Sotheby's is doing is important. But like you said before, it's a problem that people, Africans, sometimes aren't as included in these
Exactly.
positions, and that has to change. That has to, and it is. I think people are trying to do that, and there are leaders on the continent for sure. But I'd love to see them, in international positions as well.
Yeah. Yeah, this made me remember this TED Talk that I watched, and it was like, don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I'm a local. Because it's so relative, like, okay, you have your passport, you're from this country, but what if you went to live to another country when you were 3 and you lived there all your life? It's like, you are local, you're from there as well. Like, to a certain extent, like, that shaped you. I spent
living in, like we said, Chad, Morocco, Mozambique, South Africa, Angola. I spent 5 years in South Africa, and whenever I go back there, I always feel at home.
Yeah.
But I'm also American. I also have family from the United States, and like we talked about before, I went back there often. So I have these pull between both worlds. But I like that TED Talk. It's an interesting question. But again, although I grew up there, there's always, I don't know every part of Africa. I know the countries that I lived in. But even, I lived in Chad when I was a child, and it's so different now. So I could go back there and
not know your
be new, to say, wow, this is it. I remember, it's so funny because I remember I don't have a huge amount of memories from when I was 3 and when I arrived, but I do remember the first night I arrived in Chad, like my first time in Africa, moving, going to this house that we were told that we were going to live in, and sitting in this chair, and I probably reached about here on the table, and we were given to eat this fish called capitaine, which is a fish from the Chari, the river that is the border between Cameroon and Chad. In this brown sauce, and it was delicious, but I had never eaten anything like that before because my mother didn't know how to make it, and it was not something that she knew how to cook, and therefore we didn't eat it, and my palate as a 3-year-old was rather limited. So I just remember being served this and thinking, whoa. But yeah, and that's so funny to me that has stayed with me, and it was such a wild time. But it was the early 90s, and things are different now. So like going back to these countries now. When I went back to Morocco for work, I had lived there again in the early 2000s, and I couldn't believe how different it was. But again, I remembered the sounds and the smells, and that to me was nice to have those memories.
Go back to.
Yeah.
What do you miss the most? Is there like a special food or a place, or the sun, the heat, going to the beach?
Yeah. I miss really good piri piri.
Yeah.
Really good piri piri. Yes. Like I remember when I was
like in Angola we have jindungu.
Jindungu, exactly, jindungu, and then Mozambique as well.
That's the real.
I miss jindungu so much. I can't even tell you. We used to go to Kabuleadu, and on the way to Kabuleadu there was this restaurant that we used to go to, and I remember ordering, whether it was fish or chicken or whatever, and always being like, excuse me, could you have jindungu? And just pouring it on, and I really miss that, because there's nothing quite like that here. But I also just miss my community, like the people, specifically the women, because my mother was a single mother. There were a lot of women who were around me who helped to take care of me.
And I think there's something special about the strength of African women.
Oh my God, totally.
And how they'll carry their child and they'll go to work.
Totally. I want
the resilience around that.
Yes. Yeah. That was an amazing thing. So I miss a lot of that community. Thankfully, a lot of the friends that I made there a lot of them have moved to to London, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jindonggu and the women, I miss them.
I like that combination. Do you collect yourself?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I try to. I don't have a huge collection, but I focus. I'm really interested in like Congolese art because I think Congo has an incredible art history that is being documented, but there's so much more that you can write and say, and you follow the trajectory of, you know, artists like Pili Pili and Bella, or Kabinda, and moving into pop, popular painting, Shari Samba, Muke, and then to younger contemporary artists now who are operating. So to me, there's this really beautiful, rich art history that I really, really love. And I think it's really interesting. I also really love Senegalese art. And what I love most about Senegal is this dynamic between the president, you know, Senghor being a poet himself, and the festivals that were happening in the 60s that brought all of this talent from the United States, and brought concepts of negritude that were happening in Paris in the 60s, and coming to Dakar to celebrate and having these discussions and music concerts and art produced. And so to me, Senegal is really important. So collecting, I like to focus on Congo, Senegal, but I also really like female artists. I think the future of this market is with the women. I think that there's so much they can say, and and I mean, great women artists in that book. But
I think that's one of the interesting things about African art. I think there's so many news stories and narratives that are still to be told, and I think that people need to hear these stories, and that's why I think it's so interesting to have this market growing, because I think it's something new on the table.
Yeah, and I you know, what we want, I think, ultimately is to have modern and contemporary African art to be on the exact same playing field as the rest of the world. To be as involved and as naturally involved in the conversation as any other, you know, as American artists or as European artists. And that's the goal of any emerging market, right? Is to have it be right up there. And that's what we're all trying to do, and have Africans be at the forefront of that.
So last question. We usually always ask our guests, because this is our slogan, and it's in our Instagram bio. So we'd like to ask, when was the last time you felt truly inspired?
I mean, I think this is honestly, it's working with my colleagues at Sotheby's, like working together as a group. You know, we're able to really learn from each other, and to me that's really inspirational. But also, you know, I went to a client's home recently and saw an amazing work of art on the wall, and it was a modern piece that I love, and they also had a bigger contemporary collection, and that is super inspirational to me. But,
Thank you, Adriana, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed it.
It was amazing.
Yeah?
It was amazing.
Cool.
Thank you so
Glad.
much.
I'm glad.